The story begins in 1887 with Thomas Ashford, a meticulous merchant with a sharp eye for detail, who inherited Cedar Hollow, his family's ancestral Virginia plantation. He anticipated the typical challenges of such an estate: the vast fields, the aging mansion, and the complex ledgers of a post-war economy. What he did not foresee was a discovery that would shatter generations of deliberate silence, exposing a truth so disturbing it defied all belief. Behind a wall in the oldest section of the house, a barrier intentionally hidden and forgotten, he uncovered a sealed room. Inside lay the undeniable, chilling evidence of lives lived in total isolation. Children, who grew into adults, had been systematically erased from every census, every family record, every document that would have confirmed their existence. The question that would reverberate through the halls of Cedar Hollow and later through the annals of history was not whether these lives had been concealed, but why an entire family had conspired to keep them hidden from the world for 4 decades. Cedar Hollow was more than a plantation. It was a monument to a vanished era. This sprawling estate of nearly 2,000 acres rested in the rolling foothills of Virginia's Piedmont region, roughly 40 miles west of Richmond. Its main house, a grand federal-style brick structure completed in 1805, featured a symmetrical facade, tall sash windows, and a wide, columned portico that spoke of prosperity and permanence. By 1887, however, that grandeur had faded, and prosperity was a distant memory. The Civil War had torn through the South, leaving economic devastation and a shattered social order in its wake. Plantations like Cedar Hollow, once powered by enslaved labor, now struggled to navigate a world where the old ways were no longer viable. At 43, Thomas Ashford was a product of this shifting landscape. Unlike his father, William, who was born into the planter class and clung fiercely to its traditions, Thomas had made his fortune in Richmond's mercantile world. He was pragmatic, educated, and possessed a quiet intensity beneath his reserved demeanor. He had married Margaret, a woman of refined sensibilities from a prominent Richmond merchant family, and together they raised 3 children: Edward, now 21 and studying law; Catherine, 19, and recently married to a tobacco factor; and James, a thoughtful 16-year-old with a passion for literature and art, who often felt out of place in the practical worlds of commerce and agriculture. Thomas's father, William Ashford, had passed away in late 1886, a year marked by a harsh winter and a lingering sense of despair that seemed to settle over the land. William had been a man of formidable will, known for his stern countenance and an almost obsessive need for order. He had managed Cedar Hollow through the war and Reconstruction, with a tenacity bordering on obsession. Though the estate never truly regained its former glory, he had also been a man of profound silences, a trait Thomas had always attributed to the burdens of his position. Now Thomas understood that those silences had been a shield. The household at Cedar Hollow was a microcosm of the post-war South. A small staff of 12, mostly freedmen and their descendants, maintained the house and grounds. There was Mrs. Eliza, the cook, whose culinary skills were legendary, but whose eyes held a perpetual sadness. John, the groundskeeper, was a man of few words but immense loyalty, having served the Ashford family since before the war. And then there were the others, a group of 4 individuals who lived in a secluded cottage on the far edge of the property, rarely seen and never spoken of. Their existence was an open secret, a whispered understanding among the older servants that one did not inquire about them. Thomas, having spent most of his adult life away, had only a vague awareness of them, dismissing them as distant relatives or dependents of his father's charity. Elela Nina Ashford, William's widow and Thomas's mother, was a fragile presence in the house. She had retreated into a world of quiet grief and fading memories, her mind often wandering. She spent her days in her sun-drenched sitting room on the second floor, surrounded by faded photographs and the ghosts of her past. Her health had been steadily declining since William's death, and her once sharp intellect was now clouded by a gentle confusion. Thomas often found her staring blankly out the window, a faint, unreadable expression on her face. He would soon learn that her silence, too, was a form of protection. Even in the crisp autumn of 1887, the air at Cedar Hollow carried a faint scent of decay beneath the sweet aroma of drying tobacco leaves. The grand house, with its peeling paint and creaking floorboards, felt less like a home and more like a repository of forgotten histories, each shadow holding a secret, each dust-laden corner whispering of lives unlived. A man of order, Thomas. Ashford's first task upon inheriting Cedar Hollow was to conduct a thorough inventory of the estate, a meticulous process he approached with the same diligence he applied to his merchant ledgers. He began with the main house, systematically moving from attic to cellar, documenting every piece of furniture, every book, every forgotten heirloom. It was during this methodical exploration that his attention was drawn to the cellar. The main cellar was a cavernous space, cool and damp with a pervasive, earthy smell. It housed rows of wine bottles, barrels of preserved vegetables, and an assortment of discarded household items, broken tools, moth-eaten blankets, and trunks filled with forgotten correspondence. Thomas had explored this cellar countless times as a boy, a place of shadowy adventures and whispered tales. But even then, a particular section of the eastern wall had always intrigued him. It was a stretch of brickwork that seemed to absorb light, a solid, unyielding expanse that felt different from the rest. He remembered asking his father about it once, a fleeting question from a curious child. William Ashford's response had been sharp, almost venomous. "That wall is not to be touched, Thomas. It holds nothing of interest to you." The subject had been closed with a finality that silenced any further inquiry. Now, with his father gone, Thomas felt a renewed, almost compulsive curiosity. He examined the wall more closely. The mortar between the bricks in this particular section was indeed different, slightly lighter in color, less weathered, and applied with a less skilled hand than the original masonry. It was a patch, a repair, a deliberate concealment. The realization sent a shiver down his spine, a premonition of something deeply unsettling. He returned the following afternoon, armed with a heavy claw hammer and a sturdy chisel. The house was quiet. The servants occupied with their daily routines, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the fields. He worked in silence, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of the chisel against mortar echoing in the damp stillness of the cellar. To his surprise, the mortar gave way with relative ease, crumbling into fine dust. It was as if the wall had been designed to be temporary, a facade rather than a permanent barrier. After nearly an hour of strenuous effort, a small opening appeared. He peered into the darkness beyond, a faint, musty odor wafting out. Retrieving a lantern from a nearby shelf, he lit it, the flickering flame casting dancing shadows. He widened the opening just enough to squeeze through, his heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and morbid fascination. He found himself in a narrow, unlit passage, barely wide enough for his shoulders. The air was thick and still, heavy with the scent of old wood and something else. Something indefinable, like forgotten lives. The passage led to a heavy wooden door, secured by a rusted iron chain and a formidable padlock. The lock was ancient, its metal corroded by time and damp. With a surge of adrenaline, Thomas brought the hammer down on the padlock. It shattered with a resounding clang that seemed to reverberate through the very foundations of the house. The door, freed from its long imprisonment, groaned on its hinges as he pushed it open, revealing the darkness beyond. The room was not what Thomas had expected. He had anticipated a storage space, perhaps a forgotten cache of valuables or a hidden compartment for illicit goods. Instead, the lantern light revealed a space that was undeniably, chillingly, a living quarter. Approximately 12 feet by 15 feet, it was small but meticulously organized, every item placed with deliberate, almost desperate care. In one corner, a narrow cot was neatly made, its thin mattress covered by a faded but clean linen sheet. A small, hand-stitched quilt lay folded at its foot. Beside the cot, a rudimentary wooden table held a chipped ceramic pitcher and basin, both empty but spotless. Above the table, a shelf contained a small collection of books, their leather bindings worn smooth from countless readings. Thomas picked one up. It was a copy of Pilgrim's Progress, its pages brittle and yellowed. His gaze then fell upon the walls. They were whitewashed, but in places the plaster was scratched and marked. Above the cot, a series of charcoal marks formed a crude calendar, groups of 5 vertical lines, with the 5th line crossing the previous 4. Thomas counted them, his breath catching in his throat. Full groups, and then 4 additional marks, 47 groups of 5, 235 plus 4, 239 days. But the ledger entries would later reveal a much longer period. This was just one segment of time, perhaps a child's attempt to track their existence. There were other marks, too, names scratched into the plaster with a sharp object. He recognized some. Others were unfamiliar. Samuel, Margaret, Thomas. The sight of his own name etched into the wall of this hidden prison sent a jolt of profound unease through him. And Catherine. These names were inti.